Hello. Today we have another guest, Håkan Hydén from Lund University, and he's one of the most well-known name in the norm theory, and we welcome him. Welcome, Håkan Hydén.
Thank you.
And would you like to tell about yourself and your research area for our students, please?
I'm educated both as a lawyer and a social scientist. I started to study law here in Lund, actually, and I felt that I had some problems with the narrow costume of law and legal studies. So I was happy enough to get in contact with the sociology of law, which was introduced at the university at that time. So that made me studying sociology and social sciences afterwards. I worked as a clerk, as a lawyer for 2.5 years before getting back to the academia and took a PhD in sociology of law.
Mm-hmm. And we know that you are working extensively in norm theories.
Yeah, that has to do with sociology of law. I was for long, after becoming a professor, the chair in sociology of law, I looked for the core of the subject, and not all scholars in the subject might agree, but for me, norms is the essence of the knowledge about sociology of law. Because norms gives us explanations of why people act in certain ways on a kind of collective level. So it's a kind of correspondence, I would say, to psychology, understanding why we as human beings act in certain situations in a certain way. But as a sociologist of law, I'm trying to find explanations on a kind of, as we say, macro level, societal level, what makes people act in certain ways. And that made me, let's say, focus on norms.
Okay. Thank you. And my question, I'm sure that our students would like to know more. You have a long experience behind you. You have visited a lot of countries and you have worked in different areas. And today, if I ask you what issues occupy your mind most and why?
Yeah. To start with, I would like to say that as a sociologist law interested in norms, I'm a kind of all-eater, both from a legal point of view and a societal point of view. So it depends. I have worked with human rights for long, especially in the 1990s in different continents with scholars from different countries. When I worked with human rights, I did it from a kind of, let's say, action perspective, not looking at human rights in books. Of course, you have to have that knowledge in order to know what it is all about. But my interest was to follow up how do human rights work and operate in different areas and different settings.
In practice. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Before we start this interview, you are talking about the gap problem. And could you explain a bit more about this?
Is that we are talking about primarily human rights. And in relation to human rights, this gap problem, the problem between rights or law in books and law in action, how rights operate, is extremely huge, big in relation to human rights. So therefore, I mean, it's something which is addressed in sociology of law. Almost everyone working within that field will know about this gap problem because it belongs to the core of the subject. And I find reason to bring it up here when we are talking about human rights and norms and sociology of law. And another way for me, the gap problem might be translated to the relation between legal norms and social norms. Legal norms are there in the books, and social norms, they are here in reality. And the question is how to minimize that gap and in best case bring them together, because then you have law as it's meant to operate.
Otherwise, a lot of frustration.
It's a lot of
And
frustration and trust in the whole system, in the legal system, in human rights, etc., might be threatened if we ignore the gap as such. So we have to fight it.
What are the domains and questions that, when you look from today, occupy you?
Let me give you an example, which is not necessarily of the highest priority in relation to what I am working with, but I have came in contact, for instance, with one of the students in working with freedom of expression. The guy is from Bangladesh, and I followed his and still following his work. And when it comes to freedom of expression, a core human rights, you can approach it in different ways. If you take just for, at least for pedagogic reasons, try to explain the difference here between a legalistic or a legal perspective and a sociology of law perspective. If you approach freedom of expression from a legal point of view as a human rights as such, then you look for legal means, you try to use this freedom of expression to protect the possibility to act as a social agent, to a blogger or whatever, a journalist or
A simple citizen.
yeah. But if you approach it from a sociology of law point of view, you might say, and think in another way, you say, okay, what's threatening freedom of expression in this country? And then you can find different stakeholders or different repressive mechanisms in that society. And then you try to, let's say, bring these people or these stakeholders together in order to create some kind of dialogue forum. Of course, you might not be able to do that as an individual, but if you're working within an NGO, or you can create a network of NGOs trying to create a kind of understanding of the problem and try to get people together. That's one way of working with human rights, where you use human rights as a kind of platform or starting point for mobilizing people in order to create a better world. If you have a specific social problem and you would like to solve it in that country, you can use this legalistic way, or you can use this more softer sociology of law way. And what you choose, I think, is dependent to a certain extent on the situation in the country. I mean, in Sweden and many parts of the Western world, you can use the legalistic way right away, because you have a trustworthy political and legal system. But if you work in other countries where the state is your enemy, then you can't trust the state and the political and legal system to help you. Perhaps you have to influence that, and you can do that by acting, bringing these different stakeholder groups together.
Before finishing our interview, would you like to add anything that you would like to inform our students about?
No, I would like to add a lot. But I have to choose, and you have yourself introduced the topic of norms. And being both a legal and a social scientist scholar, I used to say that law is never stronger than the underlying norms in society. In order to understand how law operates, you have to be aware of the norms operating in that society. Many times conflicting norms, but sometimes you have to find out what norms you can play with, so to say. So my experience is that every, let's say, more or less every human rights problem is related to norms, to specific norms threatening the human rights. Human rights are something which is introduced mainly from an international level in order to change the situation in the world and in the specific countries. And for that reason, I mean, you have to look what is threatening, as I said, the human rights. Why are they so important? And to understand that, you have to understand the social norms operating. So what you, in the sociology of law perspective, have to change is you have the challenge to change the norms. And that is what most NGOs, I would say, are working with in practice. They are working in affecting the situation for women, for vulnerable groups, for children, etc. And that is to create norms or to change norms in order to create a better world for these people.
Okay, thank you very much for participating in our class. And it was very, very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.